envision the world as it was in the lives of our grandparents, perhaps your great-grandparents. Now think for a moment about how it was in Edwardian England or America at the time before the First World War. Race, Charles notes, was accepted as a given, a biological fact, with lineages dividing white from black that reach back through primordial time. Differences in customs and beliefs reflected differences in intelligence and destiny, with every culture finding its place on a rung of an evolutionary ladder that went from the savage to the barbarian to the civilized of the Strand of London, with technological wizardry, the great achievement of the West, being the sole measure of progress and success. Sexual and behavioral characteristics were fixed. Whites were smart and industrious, and some people were barely people at all. Incredibly, as recently as 1902, in the lifetime of my grandfather, it was debated in Melbourne, Australia, as to whether or not the Aboriginal peoples of Australia were in fact human or not. Women's suffrage only came in 1919, 3 years after the birth of my father. Immigrants in almost all nations were seen as a threat, even by those who had only recently themselves clawed their way ashore. The poor, of course, were responsible for their own miseries. As for the blind, the deaf, the dumb, the cripples, and the mad, they were best locked away, lobotomized, or even killed to remove them from the gene pool. In the time of my grandfather, the superiority of the white male was accepted with such assurance that the concise Oxford English Dictionary, published in 1911, had no entries for racism or colonialism. Interracial marriage remained illegal in much of the United States until 1967. Now, here we are 2 generations later, and it goes without saying that no educated person would share any of these bankrupt certitudes that I've now listed, all of which raises a question. What was it that allowed our culture to go from 0 to 60 in a generation? Now, all of those were political movements, but political movements are built fundamentally on the possibility of change. And the catalyst, as Charles King reminds us in his wonderful book, was the wisdom and scientific genius of Franz Boas and a small band of courageous scholars, Margaret Mead, Alfred Kroeber, Elsie Kluel Parsons, Melva Herskovits, Edward Sapir, Robert Lowry, Ruth Benedict, the incomparable Zora Neale Hurston, and many others, contrarians all, who came into his orbit destined to change the world. And we today live in the social landscape of their dreams. The scientific realization that humanity is one interconnected and undivided whole. Now, widely acknowledged as a father of American cultural anthropology, Franz Boas was the first scholar to explore in a truly open and neutral manner how human social perceptions are formed and how members of distinct societies become conditioned to see and interpret the world. Far, far ahead of his times, doing his fieldwork in the 1880s, Boas recognized that every distinct social community was a unique facet of the human legacy and its promise. Each was a product of its own history. None existed in some absolute sense. We create our social realms, Boas would say. Determine what we then define as being common sense, universal truths, the appropriate rules and codes of behavior. Beauty really does lie in the eye of the beholder. Manners don't make the man. Men and women invent the manners. Race and gender are cultural constructs derived not from biology, but born in the realm of ideas.